So, dear Ambassador, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the University of Zurich. We are here in the auditorium at the invitation of three institutions: the Swiss Japanese Society, the Swiss Japanese Chamber of Commerce, and the Europe Institute, the Competence Center for European Law at the University of Zurich. The University of Zurich has a long tradition to invite distinguished guests from international politics, business, and science. Probably the most prominent guest talking from this podium was Winston Churchill. On 19 September 1946, he gave a speech about the future of Europe, which ends with the famous sentence, "Let Europe arise." Today, we have the honor of welcoming Ambassador Kojiro Shiraishi, and I would like to introduce our guest briefly. According to Kyodo News, it was an unusual move to appoint Mr. Kojiro Shiraishi, the chairman of the Yomiuri Publishing Group, as ambassador to Switzerland. I quote, "The appointment of Mr. Shiraishi is a rare case of a media figure becoming a top envoy. He fills the vacancy left by the resignation in April of Etsuro Honda." Mr. Shiraishi, a former political reporter, rose through the newspaper's ranks to become group president in June 2011. End of quote. For those of you who are not familiar with the Japanese media landscape, let me say that Yomiuri Shimbun is the newspaper with the largest circulation in the world. As of April 2021, the circulation of its morning edition is 7.9 million copies. It is a national newspaper with more than 145 years of history. Ambassador Shiraishi also served as owner of the Yomiuri Giants baseball team before becoming chairman of the Yomiuri Group. As head of the Japanese Newspaper and Publishers and Editors Association, he sat on the governmental panel that helped choose Japan's new era name, Reiwa. Since September 2019, Mr. Shiraishi serves as ambassador of Japan to Switzerland. Today, he will speak to us about Japanese newspapers, a very timely topic of fundamental importance to all societies. Newspapers and other media are often termed as the fourth pillar of democracy, along with the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. On the one hand, they serve as trustworthy information source for the public, and on the other hand, they are watchdogs monitoring the public administration and government. But the classical media business has come under pressure from the internet and the social media platforms. Free access to information seemed to be a blessing at first, but concerns about fake news, filter bubbles, politically uncontrolled information, and hate speech raise questions on how the media landscape should be organized. Just 2 months ago, Swiss voters turned down a decision by Parliament to increase public funding for Swiss media, primarily dedicated for print and online news. The government said it was important to promote quality journalism and small publishing houses also at the local level. The Parliament approved the subsidy system in view of the crucial role that quality journalism plays in our democracy. Particularly the media in minority languages seem to be in need of support. However, a committee of politicians collected enough signatures to challenge the Parliament's decision, and 56% of the voters in Switzerland rejected the proposal. How do Japanese newspapers adapt to the challenges of the digital transformation and online economy? I think there is no better expert to talk about this topic than Ambassador Shiraishi. Ambassador Shiraishi, it's a great pleasure to welcome you at the University of Zurich. We are truly honored to have you here to open the Japan lecture series. We also would like to thank you for the support in setting up this series. Japan is an important partner in science and education. The University of Zurich is working closely with many Japanese universities and has an established strategic partnership with Kyoto University, which is the alma mater of Ambassador Shiraishi. I would also like to thank Professor Andreas Kellerhals and his team for organizing the event. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much for your kind introduction. And so Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored today by being received in your ancient university and by the address which has been given to me on your behalf and which I greatly value. I wish to speak to you today about the tragedy of Europe. And some may remember, just I quote the opening remarks from Sir Winston Churchill's speech delivered in this lecture room on September 19th, as Mr. Schwarzenegger mentioned, September 9th, 1946, the 16 months after World War II ended in Europe. So it is a great honor to stand now on the same podium. It is coincidence that I was born on September 8th in 1946, just an 11-day-old baby when Winston Churchill made his speech. So by the way, in order to prevent the reoccurrence of two monstrously destructive European wars, Churchill proposed the creation of the United States of Europe and emphasized that it must be founded on a partnership between France and Germany. I admire his insightful suggestion, for it has served Europe well these last 60 years. So today,
in all this urgent work, France and Germany must take the lead together. Great Britain, the British Commonwealth of Nations, mighty America, and I trust Soviet Russia, for then indeed all would be well, must be the friends and sponsors of the new Europe and must champion its right to live and shine. And therefore I say to you, let Europe arise.
Okay. So today, I wish to speak to you not about the tragedy of Europe, but of the tragedy of newspapers. However, I cannot help but touch on the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. On behalf of the government of Japan and its people, I condemn Russia in the strongest possible term. We stand in solidarity with Ukraine. And we should keep in mind that war does not only kill innocent people, but also truth. Whenever I read and watch breaking news from Ukraine, I remember the words of Hiram Johnson, a US senator. He warned during World War I, quote, the first casualty when war comes is truth, end quote. In spite of war correspondents' fearless efforts to capture decisive moments, it is not easy for reporters to present a complete picture of a war. The military authorities' intervention, censorship, and disinformation tend to hinder journalists from unearthing hidden facts and truths. The Western media appears to be relatively free to gather facts. On the contrary, in Russia, independent and anti-government media are in the straitjacket of censorship. They cannot report about anti-war protests. They cannot report about what's going on in Ukraine. The Kremlin uses the government-sponsored media as a mouthpiece, disseminating propaganda to rally the public behind President Putin. So this is what George Orwell depicted in his novel, 1984. The regime that wants to restrict the free flow of information and strangle the media almost to death. A half-strangled media is, of course, in their interest because they want their citizens to listen to one voice, and just one voice only, that of the state. So protesting against the government's intervention, the last independent newspaper in Russia, the Novaya Gazeta, edited by Nobel laureate Dmitry Muratov, announced on Monday that it suspended operations because of repeated warnings from the government. So why not just let the newspaper be a puppet of the state? One could ask. This question can be put another way. What use is journalism? In our time, the answer, I think, is that the freedom of the press is the safeguard of democracy. So Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the United States, once said, quote, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate at the moment to prefer the latter." End quote. Although it was made 2 centuries ago, this statement testifies to the importance of journalism in a democracy. The media is often described as a fourth estate of power, a term coined by the English statesman Edmund Burke. So this is because they exercise great influence over their readers, can frame political issues, and advocate for specific policies. So accordingly, the press should realize their responsibilities. If not, the media might lose people's trust and respect. So despite the shared understanding of the importance of journalism, the newspapers around the world face many challenges. Research in the United States disclosed an interesting case. A small-town mayor in California lined his pockets by raising his annual salary higher than that of the US president. He reportedly took advantage of the absence of a local newspaper, a watchdog, which had gone out of business because of a massive decline in subscribers and advertisement listings. So another story tells us that in American communities that have lost their local papers, citizens are increasingly ignorant about local issues like taxes, unemployment, education, and social welfare. A lack of reliable information makes citizens indifferent to local politics. Although both cases were reported more than a decade ago, but they are not outliers, and we should not overlook them. Now you might reply that we have alternative sources of information, like mobile phones, tablets, computers, and televisions. We live in the information age. After all, where information is ubiquitous, so running around social networks. But are they reliable? Can you distinguish a true story from a false one? Can your neighbor, the former US President Donald Trump, was the first world leader who preferred to tweet than speak to the press. He groundlessly bashed the mainstream media for leaking fake news and arrogantly paraded his alternative truths, which were time and time again proven false by the media's fact-checking. So though Donald Trump does not value journalism that doesn't kowtow to him, I want to talk a little about the power of journalism, about its value in times of crisis. On March 11, 2011, a big earthquake hit northern Japan, followed by a tsunami, and claimed around 16,000 lives. In spite of, or perhaps because of, the crisis, a local newspaper on screen decided without hesitation to continue their reporting, not printing papers, but writing. However, they couldn't print their papers. The tsunami had soaked their printing press. Instead, they wrote everything out by hand on a roll of paper. A team of editors and reporters started collecting information on the community lifeline about running water, the electricity, the kind of lifeline information, and recorded it with a marker pen on pieces of paper and pinned them on the wall of the relief center. It was literally a world newspaper. They continued this way for a week until the printing press could be repaired. So back then, I was a board member of the Yomiuri newspaper. The earthquake also seriously hit our printing site, and we could not print. We decided to carry newspapers by truck from Tokyo, several hundred kilometers away. It turned out to be surprisingly tough because the roads were full of emergency vehicles carrying water, food, and medicine. So our delivery convoy was put behind a long line of cargo trucks. A few days later, we managed to reach the people who had evacuated to community centers outside the disaster zone and circulated our newspapers to everyone who sheltered at the relief centers. So there's no doubt that the evacuees were relieved to get information about their family members, friends, and acquaintances. This is where newspapers reside. And this is where journalists stand. I highly esteem the local paper's determination and contribution. As a role model, they highlighted the spirit of journalism. So newspapers never sleep. Reporters do not stop working as long as there are things to report, as long as there are readers to reach. So I want to depart from the value of journalism in times of crisis and sketch for you the history of the modern Japanese newspaper. So knowing where we have come from may help us gain our bearings about where we are going. The history of the modern Japanese newspaper is relatively young, going back to the Meiji Restoration, the revolution against the Tokugawa shogunate in 1868. The Tokugawa samurai clan dominated Japan for about 2.5 centuries. A totalitarian regime. They demanded ordinary people obey the authorities and denied them access to information. Nevertheless, in the capital of Edo, the world's biggest city at the time, with approximately 1 million residents so far, London, almost 800,000. So biggest city at the time. In Edo, there were publishers on the street selling flyers for a few pennies, when the scandalous incident happened. Yet these flyers were laborious to produce, printed from woodblock printing presses, and they cautiously kept away from provocative political issues in order to avoid reprisal from the shogunate. So since the Tokugawa clan united and ruled Japan with the emperor in Kyoto as its nominal head, the peace under despotic rule prevailed. So during the feudal days, even children of peasants could run at the Buddhist temple-run school and study reading, writing, and arithmetic. The experts say that the literacy rate was relatively high comparing with that of other countries, which means that many potential newspaper readers were already in the market. The Meiji Restoration was a farewell to the persistent self-isolation of the Tokugawa shogunate. Japan opened its door to the Western world, and modern inventions flooded into Japan, including the newspaper printing press. The population of Japan exploded due to its growing economy, as did its political influence after Japan fought and won wars against China in the mid-1890s and Russia in the first decade of the 20th century. The new era ushered in an expanded freedom of the press, which encouraged publishers to launch newspapers in print with imported printing machines. By the end of the 1800s, the newspapers had sprouted all over Japan. Wars were useful for stimulating people's thirst for the latest news and galvanized the publishing the business. And the newspaper publishers started to print both morning and evening editions, and sometimes even printed extra editions to carry breaking news. They contracted with sales agents who would sell newspapers at kiosks and, in due course, delivered newspapers door to door. Occasional leaders became yearly subscribers who received a set of morning and evening editions. The left side is the flyer. They are printed by the wooden block, the printing, and the right side is the modern, newspaper. So I just described the origins of the Japanese newspaper, but now I want to jump forward in time to the golden age of the Japanese newspaper and the beginning of its decline. So I would like to show you some fundamental figures about Japanese newspapers. Japan has a population of 126 million, so 14 times as large as that of Switzerland. So looking back at Japan's media landscape from the 1970s through the early 1990s, before digital information technology landed in Japan, so newspapers were the champion of the media, competing only with television broadcast. So backed by Japan's economic growth, the newspaper publishing business was thriving. The two pillars of its revenue, the subscription fees and advertisements, were on the rise. In the early 1980s, around 40 years ago, the Yomiuri Shimbun, the newspaper I worked for, printed 10 million copies for the morning edition and 4.5 million for the evening edition every day. So it had about 30 printing factories across Japan and delivered copies to subscribers' homes in the morning and evening edition. So the home delivery system is a key factor to have Japanese newspaper thrive in the market. So just focusing on the circulation of the morning edition, the Yomiuri was followed by the Asahi, which has 8 million copies, the Mainichi, 5 million, and the Nikkei, about 3 million readership. So together, these papers were the biggest players in the Japanese media landscape. But you can watch the peak in the 1980s, somewhere like that. So just focusing on the circulation for the morning editions, I mentioned the 8 million, 5 million, 3 million, so big, large number of the copies the newspaper companies published in the 1980s. And the Yomiuri and other major dailies cover almost whole areas of Japan. And consequently, we are called national general newspapers. Yet there are more than 100 local newspapers, smaller size. Local papers, but still have lots of influence over the local communities. However, as of 2020, the newspaper circulation in Japan is about 30 million copies per day, barely half the volume of the peak in the 1980s. Newspaper readership has long been on the downward spiral. It's a worldwide phenomenon, and Japan is no exception. So newspapers are losing subscribers year by year. And the freedom of the press was a shock to Japan in the 1890s, and both check on the government and vital component of a new democratic Japan. But 100 years later, the newspaper business, the golden child of the free press, suffered a shock of its own, digitalization. The downward spiral has been caused by the invention of the internet and the immense changes that this new conduit of information has had on our lives. I remember the day I watched a video featuring an innovative format, a newspaper in the digital age. It was in the mid-1990s. One of my colleagues who I sent to Silicon Valley in California to study the new internet technology, they brought back the video. It was a product of an American local newspaper's media laboratory. The title was truly astonishing to me. It was something like, "Our newspapers, dinosaurs on the path to extinction." A chief researcher who was also a former editor commented that the newspaper would transform its current ink on paper format into a revolutionary tabloid newspaper. He elaborated in the video that a future reader would enjoy articles with audio and video whenever and wherever he or she is. In hindsight, it was a modern tablet computer, like an iPad, but in the cradle days of the internet, it was only a distant fantasy. In those days, I was in charge of new media, and my assignment was to explore the possibility of the internet as a business tool. At one meeting, I intended to play a devil's advocate to introduce our management to digital technology. Back then, it took us several minutes to access the homepage of the White House. But that is just how it was in the 1990s. Slow processors, the narrow bandwidths of a dial-up connection, and an immature user interface. So before this, none of our board members had ever heard of the internet, let alone used it. I showed them the White House homepage and the tabloid newspaper video, but no one responded with enthusiasm. They just shrugged it off. So, however, even though the board was not very enthusiastic, the Yomiuri newspaper nonetheless launched its internet homepage in 1995, and its competitors opened their digital sites at almost the same time. So American newspapers were actually trailblazers, launching digital services on a trial basis. So Yomiuri Online, we named it the digital version of the Yomiuri newspaper. We call it Yomiuri Online, so which uploaded several stories from the print newspaper because we had neither the budget nor the personnel to launch a full-scale service. So we were a small team because the board did not expect the internet to change the way we consume information, or at least not as first it did. Some conservative publishers worried about cannibalization between traditional printed papers and digital services. So newspapers needed to give people a reason to visit their website, but the more news content they uploaded for free or wholesaled to search engines and platforms, the more subscribers they lost because people realized they didn't need to pay for news. This turned into a vicious circle, and this business model did not work as they hoped. Until now, one exception is a Nikkei, which is said to be successful in digital services because it is a newspaper specialized in economic and financial news, which other dailies like the Yomiuri and the Asahi cannot match. And we have the other exceptional, the newspapers. They are still. The New York Times and the Washington Post and the Financial Times. They are English language newspapers. But when it comes to the Japanese newspapers, we cannot cross our borders because of the language barrier. So Japanese newspapers' digital business was shifting from an advertisement-oriented model to a subscription model. The Yomiuri and other competitors in Japan figured out a hybrid model, offering a small amount of additional fee for newspaper subscribers. The monthly subscription fee for an income paper copy of the morning and evening editions is around 40 francs. The Yomiuri offers digital service to existing subscribers without additional fee. So regarding the digital services by the newspapers, only the Nikkei makes a profit. Meanwhile, I think the Nikkei's digital services, their earnings cannot make up for the loss of the income paper because they are losing big number of subscribers. So Japanese newspapers, as they destined to go bankrupt sometime soon, I would say that a few of them might withdraw from the publishing business, although I have not yet seen a newspaper with a long history go out of business. The major newspapers are a conglomerate of media businesses, no longer focused solely on print newspapers. The Yomiuri Group, as referred by Mr. Schwarzenegger before, the Yomiuri Group owns a national network of television stations and operates a professional baseball team, a leisure park, a tourist company, and Philharmonic Orchestra. So other newspaper groups have also diversified their businesses in order to hedge against possible risk. So they have experienced the lots of crisis before, so they learned how to diversify their business, avoiding risk. So here in Switzerland, the recent result of the February 13 referendum on the support for the media surprised me. Swiss voters said no, declining to help the media in this country. A rescue package of sorts included a variety of relief plans for newspapers, online media, and other media-related services. So like in Japan and the US, local newspapers here have also seen declining subscriber numbers and advertisement listings absorbed by digital services and new media, which has become a global trend these days. The plight of Swiss media was, however, merely exacerbated by the referendum result. In recent years, Swiss newspapers were forced to streamline their business and reduced workforce. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this trend, sent it from bad to worse. So many reporters lost their job, frankly speaking. Here and there, Japan and everywhere. The status quo of journalism seems very, very bleak. So with regard to the future of newspapers, one Washington Post executive said in an interview that the future model of the newspaper would be integrated into digital services, which carry breaking news and commentaries around the clock without considering deadlines for printing. I do not fully agree with him, although I'm not optimistic about the future of printed newspapers. How can newspapers survive this winter of discontent? The big question. Not easy question to answer. So I believe that ink on paper will be able to coexist with digital news services as long as we improve the hybrid model of ink on paper and digital services. For that purpose, the reporters must drastically change their mindset. In the Yomiuri, I have been advising young reporters send an article with a photo or video footage to our digital service as soon as possible. So without considering the traditional newspaper deadlines. So I'm afraid that I lag behind the digital age, but I have confidence in the power of ink on paper journalism. To use an analogy, it is no doubt true that we recognize the convenience of digital books, but we also acknowledge the value of printed books. Though some people in the last decade predicted the extinction of the printed book, but it is still alive and strong. So that's why I believe both kinds of book coexist and both kinds of journalism will prevail. So as a former newspaper journalist, I hope that newspapers will survive. Nevertheless, in order to remain in the mainstream of journalism, our editors, writers, reporters must change themselves. So newspapers will not follow in the footsteps of the dinosaurs as long as we can adapt ourselves to a changing landscape, as long as we can adapt ourselves to a changing landscape. So thank you very much for your listening and patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for this excellent presentation. You managed, in a way, at the end to be optimistic and pessimistic in the same time, right? About the future of the printed.
Yes, I'm a hybrid person.
The future is unknown, right? And above all, quality newspapers will have probably a hard time. There's always the question of how much are people willing to pay for having quality news and quality newspaper. Do you see there somewhere a limit that, I remember in the maybe 20 years ago, you paid for a Neue Zürcher Zeitung, a yearly abonnement, you paid maybe 400 francs. I think now it's up to 700 or even more. And we always argue to say the price is not important, important is the quality. But there might be somewhere a threshold where it's too much.
No, I don't know how much subscription fee the readers are likely to pay. But of course, the price of newspaper in Japan has been rising, so decade by decade. But almost they are reaching the ceiling, I think. We cannot raise the subscription fee anymore. Otherwise, we will be lose our subscribers to the digital services. This is quite the tough question. So, still, the newspaper companies in Japan making every efforts to have both ends meet, but it's becoming difficult.
And do you think it's wise, or is it an obligation, a duty by government to subsidize private newspaper corporations in order to maintain a quality newspaper landscape?
Yeah, we have been, Japanese journalists have been very proud of doing business without government subsidies. But just recently, 3 years ago, when the consumption tax of Japan was raised from 8% to 10%. So we claimed the government should consider about the management of newspaper in crisis. So we asked the government to have the consumption tax for newspaper on the 8%. So we got it. But some the newspapers as well as the food, they stayed at the level of 8%. The other commodities were the 10%, the consumption tax, or this is value-added tax here. So, but in any other advanced economies, so including the European countries, the journalists are they are enjoying the reduced taxation, or the kind of the benefits for tax reduction.
So some kind of indirect
subsidy, so to speak,
okay,
right now.
Okay. I would like to invite the audience to come forward with questions or comments, please.
Ambassador, I would like to know, in Europe we are talking a lot about the pressure on the journalists. They have less time, they have to produce everything in a hurry. So it's not only about the decreasing number of readers and of sold copies, it's also about the content itself. Do you see a similar tendency in Japan, so that the content loses in quality because of lack of time, of reduced staff? And are there any countermeasures that are taken?
So the same with the Japanese journalists. Of course, so we are worrying about the news contents, running around the social networking services. So we are sort of wholesaling our contents to the platforms, including the GAFA, of course, and the local Japanese the platformers, and we gain some portion of compensation from them, but not enough to cover the expenditures spent for the digital services. So the making profit from digital services is quite tough job for a newspaper company. As I mentioned, even the Nikkei Shimbun press is having lots of trouble. So how to raise profits from digital services, we have no idea so far. So the many advertisements are absorbed by the digital services, the big players. That's why the EU is restricting the golfers, the American, the platformers, and service providers. Otherwise, we cannot expect the revenue equilibrium, so to speak. It's okay.
Quality and reputation somehow go along for a newspaper. Probably, if you think a newspaper source is trustworthy, you believe what the newspaper is reporting. Now, some years ago, we had this wave of fake news accusations coming over from the U.S. and in a way this made it somehow unreliable whether what is reported in the news is true or whether you just say what you don't like is fake and then you don't know what the truth is. How are medias, producing, living in such a very difficult, under such very difficult circumstances?
It's a difficult task for the publishers to maintain the quality. The high quality is guaranteed by high quality reporters, high quality writers, high quality editors, So it's time consuming, money consuming, the project. So it takes time to educate, to grow the young reporters, the writers, to be grown up, to have good common sense of them, to distinguish good from bad, true from false. It takes time. It needs experience. If a newspaper company couldn't afford to educate, to grow, to nurture good quality journalists, it's almost end of journalism. So how to maintain journalism? It's a big question. Of course, the digital service providers have their own reporters, the writers, but many of them are transferred from the old traditional media. They worked for newspapers, they worked for TV stations, they changed jobs too to digital services companies. Of course, they, for themselves, are trying to educate, to nurture the young, promising journalists, but it may take time, not enough so far, to have a group of good journalists. So it takes time. It consumes lots of money and time.
And do you see a risk that even if they produce quality news, that people out there who don't like those news just call them fake news? So even if the news are good, quality-wise, at least a part of the population don't believe what the news are because maybe some leaders or whatever call them fake or alternative facts and things like that.
So the fact-checking is necessary, is a must. It is quite new phenomenon since the Donald Trump appearance on the surface of U.S. politics. Right? He always says, we have alternative fact, truth. No, it's a lie. But the Trump administration, the White House, don't approve the fact-checking results. even though the Washington Post and New York Times have proven almost everything that Donald Trump made or statement in his statement were false, disinformation. So how to find out the truth out of the sea of false stories. So that's the business of journalism. No?
Please.
Maybe an additional question, because when I was in Japan many, many years ago, there was also a little bit of criticism against the Japanese club system, so that government agencies had like journalists in a club and they had preferential treatment. Is this still in place, or has it been abolished, or how is the situation now with the access to the information from the government?
Yeah, the press club system is still alive, not fully abolished. But the press clubs at the foreign ministry, at the cabinet office, in any other central government are still existing. Of course, it's invited criticism from the foreign press. They're working in Japan. It's closed in the kind of the very closeness between the journalism and the bureaucracy or the politics. So we have been very cautious about how to keep good distance. Make sure that as you may know, the politicians and the government officials are trying to buy reporters. Some feeding some tips of information, and the dining and the wining. This kind of some measures were taken because of the press club. This kind of I don't know how to say, not open the closed door and the system. That's why we are often criticized. So the press clubs, the system is becoming more and more open than before, as you were in Japan, and because of the pressure from outside, because of the kind of evolving or the consciences, the journalists, from inside, both from inside and outside. But still the press club system is working. So sometimes I think it's needed, right? To gather information, to follow information, and from the government.
I saw a question over here, the gentleman. Do you need a mic or?
Thank you, Christian. About 20 years ago in Switzerland and in many other European countries, we saw the launch of free newspapers for commuters. In Switzerland, it was there were two. One was Monopol, which was I think it was a Monopol or something like that. Came from Sweden, and then 20 Minutes that was launched here and later taken over by the Tagesanzeiger. Do you have the same phenomenon in Japan? And if so, how do you see the influence of such newspapers on the future of the printed press?
You mean the free papers, you know? Yeah, we have also the free papers since the 1980s or 70s, I guess. But they were not successful so far because of the. So nowadays the advertisers would like to choose the digital services. Just not the printed the papers. So of course, the free papers are existent in the Japanese market, but not thriving, not growing. So some of them have already disappeared. So others of course, coming on the surface, but not so big as 20 minutes or the free papers here in Switzerland. Because when it comes to the newspaper subscription, the home delivery system is a basic idea. It's quite rare or unusual to buy a copy at the kiosk for ordinary people. So ordinary the subscribers, readers in Japan are expecting the copy delivered every morning by delivery service agent. So some do, of course, when it comes to the sport, newspaper, or other casual, the special the newspapers, and they are sold at kiosks. And some are likely to buy copies, but not so thriving so far when it comes to the cheaper and free the papers in Japan. It's very a different situation.
Please, there's a question coming here, and afterwards, the gentleman over there.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. I have a question actually linked to the free newspapers. The sources of income for media, apart from subscriptions and the fees that readers pay or watchers pay, are obviously linked to advertisement a lot. And in times of difficulties, as you have explained, where readers find or seem to find free of charge alternatives such as the free newspapers, the role of advertisement may become even more important as an income source for media. But that could also impede the independence of media. And I don't know, but for example, if we think of advertisement by Russian oil companies, if that was proposed to Yomiuri, I don't know what you would respond today, but maybe not. How can you, or how can the independence of media be preserved in the midst of an increasing dependency of commercially driven advertisement?
Yeah, the big question. I think the pressure from the government or power, of course, the pressure from advertisers is so big. Of course, we cannot deny that factor. And sometimes we receive the claim, so to speak, claim from advertisers, and we have a room to negotiate with them, or in terms of the expression, in terms of I don't know how to say. So, in a frequent case are that for instance, the economic section reporters so do the story on, for example, a cosmetic company's products. So kind of the buds and their reputation. So advertisements, the givers, the advertisers, not so often, but sometimes they call to the publishers, claiming that we give you our company's advertisement. That's big money, and you should think about that. Please, a little bit lenient about the company products or kind of pressure, right? So we have to neglect their claims, of course, many times. But sometimes, if we find room for negotiation or consultation, that we do. So we're not the 100% independent from pressure outside. We are not 100% free from any pressure outside. So we are walking on a tightrope, so to speak. It's a business. Otherwise, we cannot survive.
Then there was a question here from that side, please.
So thank you for your talk, Mr. Ambassador. I have a question. The Japanese major newspaper company are somehow different from the European or American, in the sense that they cover the quite wide range of the readers or variety of hierarchies of the people. While, for example, the readers of Süddeutsche Zeitung or Frankfurt Allgemeine are different from the readers of the Bild. But in the case of Yomiuri or Asahi or whatever, probably except Nikkei, they tried to sell any kind of readers in Japan. And that makes, I think, the scale of the company quite large. Do Japanese newspaper companies still continue that direction? Or are you thinking the company will probably focus on certain group of the readers from now on? How do you think?
Thank you very much for your question. As you can easily imagine that the big readership means, and we have to consider, we have to think about the wide variety of readers from different classes or different corner of the world, different occupations, different jobs. So in that sense, how to say, I can understand what you mean. In a newspaper associated with the special, the class or special groups, right? But some in the European countries, some newspapers are closely related with political parties or just upper class or middle class or lower class. That kind of a difference has almost disappeared from the Japanese national newspapers. So we are so identified with the being or national or general newspapers. That means the newspaper for everyone, newspaper for every different occupation, different jobs, or different I don't know how to say, well, so many. So it's quite indistinguishable each other, right? But in the past, there are some kind of not classification, it's a reputation. The Asahi newspaper is for the upper class. The Yomiuri, the ordinary middle and lower class. The Mainichi in the middle, kind of. But it's a very big idea, I think. So that's why the so that's why we are dealing with the big population, right? And the big sized subscribers, the readership so far. Not specialized in some segment of our society. So we have also the special newspapers, specifically dealing with the I don't know how to say agriculture or manufacturing industry or academics or so on and so forth. So we are the general newspapers are dealing with lots of different the news and information. So the direction still continues to be, as you mentioned.
There is another question coming here to the right, please.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, what are you doing to attract young readers for newspapers? Because personally, my view is that probably we're not going to have newspapers anymore, as they are rather 면독사에. You have to carry them around. It's much easier to have it on your phone. It's much easier accessible and easier to research as well if you need specific targeted news. So what are you doing to appeal to young readers and also to make them aware of the importance of journalism in Japan?
Yeah, it's a big and important question. And we have a newspaper for school children. We published it in almost 10 years ago when I was president of the Yomiuri. Young people in our organization, they proposed to publish a children newspaper and for the school kids at the age of 10 to the 14. Well, in Japanese school system, in the elementary school to junior high school students, they can easily enjoy and read the newspapers. Right? It costs the, 7 francs per month, or 6 months per month, right? And it has about more than 50,000 circulation. It's something. Of course, we are not making much money, the profits from it. But we are trying to offer the new version of newspaper for the emerging generation, so to educate young readers. But I'm doubtful it's useful or not, but we should do the way to have children, young generation, they get accustomed to reading newspapers or seeing and watching newspapers. Right? This kind of effort should be done, but how far effective, I'm not confident so far. But we have this kind of the trial error efforts. Otherwise, we can be dinosaurs. So on the extinction so far. So how to educate, how to raise their kids to read not only newspapers, not only, but also the books, the printed books. It's a big question, right? So the Japanese and the elementary schools are trying to introduce the tabloid, right? iPad or other the similar devices to class. That would be very useful. The audio and the video and the services are very useful to educate young kids. Yep.
So in Switzerland, politics are discussed very openly, right? And in Japan, people are more secretive about it. It could be even rude if I talk to my Japanese friends very openly about how I view certain things. How do you think does it affect the way that maybe Japanese people are to talk about certain issues of their country in the way that they are maybe more or less motivated to consume news and media or to think more critically in certain aspects?
I'm sorry that I...
Okay, sorry. Do you think the way that the Japanese culture is, where you should not maybe discuss certain things very openly because it could perceived to be a bit rude sometimes? that also maybe stirs up less discussions in the media than on. Does that make sense?
So are Japanese too polite to discuss specific issues in the media? It's somehow a short form of, I think, what she said, right?
You know, the young people like you are loving to discuss openly, to say, to speak out that the change of the time and of course the bit different from our generations. So I have two grandchildren, 11 and 6. They are very open. They're very talkative to discuss with us. No hesitation, right? Not timid about getting themselves understood by others. So it's a kind of the change in mindset has been happening, of course. So it's not special. To Japanese, they are, I don't know how to say, self-reserved, not so talkative, not so much the discussing. Kind of the mindset is changing. So it's not the I don't know how to say it. It's almost the same with you and others in the same generation or the same years. They become more and more the active in participating the debate or discussion. It's okay.
Mr. Ambassador, you very kindly started your talk today with mentioning Winston Churchill's speech here in the university. And in the light of what you just said, I'm almost tempted to say, let newspapers arise, right?
Oh, yes.
To see in order what is going to happen in the future. We are very, very grateful to have had you here for the presentation and the lively debate. You started a new Japanese lecture series, so your name will always be enshrined in our university's future activities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank you
in a
very much
very
for
timely way, you know, Easter is around and you are in Zurich. We thought we give you some sweet Zurich quality chocolates in form of an Easter bunny. This is for you, or maybe for your grandkids. Thank you so much.